My name is John Slaughter. I have the title here at the university as Professor of Education and Engineering. I'm an engineer by training, and somehow I've ended up spending a goodly bit of my time in higher education. So that's the reason for the title, Professor of Education and Engineering. People ask me, what does a Professor of Education and Engineering do? I say it's simple. I teach engineers something about education and educators something about engineering. And so that usually stops them from asking any more questions. But, Tatiana asked me to come spend some time with you this afternoon. I've been looking forward to it. Thank you so much for the invitation. And what I thought I would do would be to, I've had a chance to look at your syllabus, which Tatiana kindly sent me, and I'm going to try to talk about some experiences I've had in higher education, or more specifically, a particular experience I've had in higher education that I think intersects with many of the issues that you are covering here in this class. In particular, I noticed that among the topics in your syllabus and the course objectives are developing a basic understanding of university and college budgets and the connection between resources and strategic planning. I'm going to talk about strategic planning. I'm going to talk about an experience I had in strategic planning. It's been now a little over 20 years ago. It doesn't seem possible, but nevertheless, I think the lessons that were contained in it are timeless and are very similar to what would be experienced today. I've had, just as background, I've been very blessed in terms of my own professional career. I spent the first 20 years of a little over 20 years of my professional career as a practicing engineer. Worked in industry for a period of time when I first got out of undergraduate school. During that time, I had the opportunity to continue in education, get a master's degree in engineering from UCLA, while working for the federal government, working for the Navy in San Diego, the Navy Electronics Laboratory. I decided after I got my master's degree I never wanted to set foot on a college campus again. That was enough. And then I ended up getting bitten by the bug to get some more education. And while working, enrolled in a doctoral program at the University of California, San Diego, and completed that while I was still working for the Navy. A few years later, I had an opportunity to join the faculty of the University of Washington as director of the Applied Physics Laboratory at the University of Washington, and at the same time became a member of the faculty of the Electrical Engineering Department. That really began my love affair with higher education. I decided that if I were going to be a faculty member at a university, I might as well be a president of the university. And I was asked by then President Jimmy Carter to come to the National Science Foundation. I spent 2 terms at the National Science Foundation, first as assistant director and later as the director of the foundation. And very commonly, people who serve in the position of director of NSF are invited to have an opportunity to consider a university presidency, and I was very fortunate to be invited to become president of the University of Maryland in College Park, and I spent 6 wonderful years as at the University of Maryland. I decided while I was at Maryland that the thing that I really enjoyed more than anything else was undergraduate education. That I felt that too many of big research universities, particularly public research universities that had 38,000 students like Maryland, oftentimes neglected the education of undergraduates and focused more of their attention on graduate students and research. And that troubled me because I knew in my own case, when I was an undergraduate, that it was exceedingly important for me to have a strong undergraduate support system in order to complete my studies. And I saw students every day at the University of Maryland who really struggled because not enough attention was being given to them as undergraduates. And so when I had an opportunity, when I received a phone call from Occidental College here in Los Angeles to consider its presidency, I jumped at that opportunity because it meant that I would have a chance to focus more of my attention on undergraduate education. So in 1988, I became president of Occidental College. I presume many of you know where Occidental is, and I say that not necessarily in jest, because I'm surprised sometimes how many people in Los Angeles have no idea where Occidental is. Everybody knows where USC is because you got to sometimes travel on the 110, and there's USC. Occidental, you have to search for it. It's not a place that you automatically see as you drive by, but it's for those of you, and I trust with the head nodding that many of you know exactly where it is. You know it is a very beautiful site and a very lovely small school, 1,600 students, 1,800 I understand now, students nestled in the Eagle Rock section of Los Angeles. When I came to Occidental, I noticed a number of things that pertain to what it is that I want to talk about today, and that I think relate to your course here in finance and higher education. First of all, Occidental had, for a variety of reasons, disconnected itself from Los Angeles. When I was named president, the press release that came out at the time said that it described the search for new president and said that I'd been appointed, and then it ends up with the obligatory paragraph that describes the college. And it said Occidental College is located east of Glendale and west of Pasadena. That troubled me because it did not say anything about being in Los Angeles. And for me, that was a major concern, that it appeared that the college was embarrassed about being able to say that it was in Los Angeles. And I remember calling the person who was in charge of public relations into my office when I read that, and I said, from now on, let us say that Occidental College is the liberal arts college of Los Angeles, located in the Eagle Rock section of the city of Los Angeles. One of the very first things that my wife and I did when we arrived at Occidental was to invite Mayor Tom Bradley, then Mayor Bradley, to come out and have lunch with us and talk about how we could become much more involved in the life of the city of Los Angeles, because I felt that that was very important. One of the professors at Occidental, when I first came, said, one of the things we want the new president to do is to make us better known nationally. And I remember responding to him by saying, "You aren't even well known in Los Angeles." And every time I see him now, he reminds me of that, because it really sort of set the tone for what I thought was important. I had the great fortune of having a chair of the search committee that hired me, who later became the chair of the board of trustees of Occidental, who was a strong supporter and who made it possible for me to do a lot of things that I would not have been able to do under a different chair. Just to give you some idea of the climate at the time. There had never been an African American president of a private university in the United States prior to that period of time. University, liberal arts college, or private. A number had been president of public institutions, but not private institutions. I had been a candidate for a private institution in the East. I had been a reluctant candidate because I was concerned that the only reason that I was a candidate was that I would be an affirmative action statistic. The school would be able to say that they were considering a minority candidate. And my fear proved to be true. And so when I was approached by Occidental, I felt that would be the same situation initially, until I met this gentleman who turned out to be the chair of the search committee and ultimately the chair of the board of trustees. And it took me just a few microseconds after meeting him to realize that his level of integrity was such that he would not participate in anything other than being very honest and straightforward to me. So the process of the search went very smoothly, and I was very, very pleased to be appointed as president. One of the first things I did after being hired was to meet with him to understand what were the issues facing the campus. And the one I just mentioned to you, and that was the problem with the relationship with the city of Los Angeles. The second is that Occidental was founded in 1887 by the Presbyterian Church. In 1910, it severed its relationship with the Presbyterian Church because the leaders of the college at that time felt that being a religious institution made it more and more difficult for it to receive the financial support that it needed to have to foster and to become strong. However, hardly anybody realized that it was no longer a school that was religious based. There was on the campus a beautiful chapel that had two large crosses on it. And prior to my arrival, there was considerable concern on the part of students and faculty, many of whom were non-Christians, that this chapel and the crosses gave a sense that the college was strictly a Christian college. And there was a movement afoot to remove the crosses from the chapel when I arrived. This was a matter of considerable concern to a number of alumni from the era of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s who really considered the college to be a Christian institution and who were very much opposed to any effort to to make it more welcoming to persons of Jewish faith or Buddhist faith or anything other than Christian faith. So that was an issue that had to be dealt with. There also was a need for a significant improvement in some of the facilities. It was my opinion that the student center that was at the college at the time was in fact a negative influence on the ability of the college to grow. That students would look at the facilities and determine that they were inadequate to meet their needs, they were not attractive, and it was very clear to me that we needed to make an investment in capital resources in order to improve the facilities. So I asked the chairman of the board to support my request to initiate a strategic plan. A strategic planning effort that would deal with the many important issues that were facing the college. And with his backing, we did initiate a strategic plan that we named Occidental Tomorrow. A plan that focused on the need for bringing Occidental up to what it needed to be for the 21st century. The major issue facing the college, in addition to its relationship with Los Angeles, its dealing with its history, was the fact that the neighborhood in which it existed had changed significantly over the years. It had become much more diverse. It was a neighborhood that early on in the 20s and 30s had been pretty much an artist colony. But by the 80s and 90s, it had become much more diverse, and the college had not really related to it in the way that a number of us felt was important. One of the arguments that I thought was significant was that if we were to become much more invested in the community, much more invested in its neighborhoods, the community and the neighborhoods would take care of the college. And in fact, that turned out to be true. In 1991 and 92, during the time of the riots in Los Angeles, many of the communities were in a very destructive mode. Occidental was protected because we had reached out to the community, made the college open to the community. Its recreational facilities were available to the community, so that the community protected it during that time. There was no damage done to the campus, even though in many of the communities not far from the campus, there was widespread damage. We decided that one of the things that we would do would be to adopt a park, Yosemite Park, which is very near the campus. It would become a place where our students and our faculty would invest in programs to support the community. These are the kinds of things that the strategic plan included, in addition to improving a number of academic offerings. We decided that one of the things that was badly needed was a focus on a women's study program. The female students and faculty at Occidental for years had been protesting the fact that there was insufficient attention given to programs designed to recognize the importance of female studies, women's studies programs, a place where women students could gather. And so as a part of our strategic plan, we had designed not only a curriculum activity around women's studies, but also the establishment of a women's studies center. Funding this became an important issue. There were a number of other improvements to the academic program, the core program, the sciences. Occidental has one of the strongest sciences program of any institution in the country. I think it ranks in terms of the number of undergraduates who go on to get PhDs in the country. It ranks number 40 among all universities, all 3,000 colleges and universities in the country. Occidental ranks number 40 in terms of the number of its undergraduates who go on to receive PhDs in the sciences. So there has always been a significant focus on the sciences, but there was a need for a new science building, a new geology building, a building that would accommodate an improved scientific program. So this had to be factored into the strategic plan. In the 80s and 90s, the word multiculturalism was very much in vogue. It's not a word you hear a whole lot now. We hear about diversity, but the word multiculturalism carried a significant amount of weight. In most cases, many people considered it very negative to refer to multiculturalism. The Occidental strategic plan was built around the idea of creating a multicultural environment, an environment of pluralism, an environment of recognizing that in a multicultural environment, one did not have to sacrifice excellence, one did not have to sacrifice quality, as seemed to be the mindset of many people with whom we were interacting, particularly alumni from earlier periods. We established 4 cornerstones around which the future of Occidental would be based: excellence, equity, community, and service. The belief that we had to be excellent in everything that we did, not just academically, but in terms of our student life, in terms of our recreational programs, in terms of our athletics programs, in terms of all those things that one uses to define a college or university experience. Equity, the belief that justice, fairness, integrity, treatment for everyone would be on the same basis, both in terms of the manner in which they have access to opportunities, as well as how they are treated, the regard in which they're held, respect. Equity became one of the cornerstones of the Occidental experience. Community, bringing everyone together, not just the students and faculty, but also the community that surrounded the campus, the alumni, the trustees, all persons who had a connection with the institution. And the final cornerstone was the idea of service, and the belief that the most valuable thing one can do is to help others. And so these became the 4 building blocks upon which our strategic plan was based. It became very clear once we had developed a strategic plan, once we had defined a mission for the college, a mission that incorporated those 4 cornerstones, that the next big issue would be funding this effort. And one of the things that I learned, we had successes and we had failures in this process. And one of the failures that became very evident was the fact that we should have thought much more clearly early on about the costs associated with what would be a very ambitious but important effort. It is very clear to me that too many strategic planning efforts fail to take into consideration the funding and the financial obligations that are going to be encountered when you establish a very ambitious strategic plan. We determined that we needed to do two things. One is we established what became known as the Planning and Priorities Council. Planning and Priorities Council was made up of representatives from the faculty, from student body, leadership, and from administration, including a representative from the Board of Trustees, who would meet periodically to identify the most important issues that needed to be addressed in the strategic plan. And in order to fund the efforts of the Planning and Priorities Council, we established what came to be known as the Capital Ventures Fund. We took 1.5% of the education and general budget of the college and set that aside on an annual basis to support new ventures that could lead to improvements in all the areas that I've described. This, we figured, would generate for our college something like $500,000 each year that could be used for these new ventures. From that fund, we were able to develop the Women's Studies program that I mentioned. We were able to, over time, build a women's center. We initiated a capital campaign that raised another $65 million that we used to create a new modern student center, which had exactly the impact that we had anticipated in terms of dramatically increasing the number of prospective applicants who attended the college. As an aside, the student center, but also the awareness that Barack Obama had been a student at Occidental, probably had a lot to do with the increase in the number of applicants. But nevertheless, the number of applicants went up nearly threefold over a 10-year period. Because of the improvements in the campus and the increased recognition in terms of the college. All of this was done at a time when the national economy and certainly the local economy was not in the strongest position to support some of the efforts. So many of the things that we wanted to do were protracted longer than we had anticipated, which is the reason I say one has to be very, very careful in setting forth an ambitious activity like this, because it becomes very much dependent upon your ability to fund the activities. But it is, I think, an important thing that must be done if, in fact, you're going to be able to make the kind of changes that are necessary. I can tell you this, that one of the more difficult issues that we faced, particularly given the fact that we did two things that caused some consternation in the community. One was dealing with the concerns of those who felt that we were in some way destroying the Christian heritage of the college. The second being helping the community, or helping the alumni and many of the older trustees and persons who were resistant to change, helping them to understand that the world had changed, that we no longer could operate in the way that the college had operated in the 40s and 50s, that that no longer were we going to be able to simply expect that our student body would be people who came from San Marino, Pasadena, Glendale, that we needed to recognize that people from South Central Los Angeles, that people from other parts, not only from California, but from other parts of the world, would be looking for an opportunity to attend a college that was preparing its students for life in a world becoming more complex, more interdependent, more pluralistic. These are the kinds of things that I had not realized going in were going to be some of the biggest barriers that we had to deal with, and the amount of time that it took to deal with them was much larger than I had anticipated. One of the things looking back at the experience that I'm convinced I should have done a better job of was preparing alumni and others who were resistant to change, and preparing them for the change, and educating them, and helping to bring them along rather than presenting to them an idea that was significantly different than they had believed. We called our strategic plan, we titled the document of the strategic plan of excellence and equity, in the belief, as I've said earlier, that there is no excellence without equity. And I said in presentations that I gave, I said that Harvard and Yale were not excellent institutions back in the days when there was a quota on Jewish students. That universities in the South, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, LSU, were not excellent institutions at the time when it was impossible for African Americans to be admitted to those institutions. That we need to recognize that unless equity existed, it was impossible to say that there was any excellence around. I remember during a convocation at the college when I had given a presentation and African American students stood up in the audience, and he said, President Slaughter, I'm concerned about the fact that you're talking so much about excellence and you're not saying anything about equity. And I said, well, you're assuming that somehow they're mutually exclusive. and they're not. I said, the most diverse place in America is the penitentiary, but no one wants to go there because there's no excellence. You need to realize that simply looking for diversity does not answer the question, that unless there is some excellence, some quality associated with it, there's no need. The plantations in the South were diverse, but there was no equity, there was no excellence in those environments. So I have come to the conclusion that we spend so much time talking about diversity, we fail to realize that what we should be talking about is equality of opportunity, that we need to be talking about an environment in which equity exists. I can't stress too much the importance of incorporating early on in the positions that you all occupy now or will occupy as a result of your educational activities. When you find yourselves in positions where you have to make decisions concerning future activities, future directions of organizations for which you will have responsibility, I can't emphasize too much the importance of thinking at the outset of how am I going to finance this effort. We were fortunate that we were able to at the same time carrying forward our strategic plan, although it took us a little while to recognize it, we were able to mount a capital campaign that raised a sufficient fund of money to make it possible for us to do the major things that we had initiated. That new student center does exist now. Another student facility exists because a trustee and his wife gave $10 million in order to establish a pavilion where students can congregate and meet. We were able to build the new science building for our geology and physics students. Again, because another trustee and his wife made a commitment of $20 million to build that new facility. We were able to build a new biology building. The Keck Foundation in Los Angeles gave us funding for a new theater on the campus. We built a new facility for heating and air conditioning for the campus. One of the original buildings on the campus is now undergoing a complete transformation as a result of the plans that were laid 15 years ago in developing a long-range strategy for the physical plant. The college became identified by U.S. News and World Report as the #1 liberal arts college in America with respect to diversity, which was something that we were extremely proud of as a result of moving aggressively in the direction of becoming a much more multicultural and pluralistic institution. We were able to do something that no other liberal arts college and very few institutions of any type in the country were able to do in terms of dramatically increasing the diversity of the faculty. And by some very innovative methods that the Dean of the Faculty introduced, we were able to attract African American and Latino men and women from institutions like Harvard and Stanford and Yale and Wisconsin and Michigan to join the faculty of Occidental, such that during one period of time, half of the new faculty that we appointed were persons of color and half were women. No other institution in the country was able to make that sort of claim. So all of these came out of the strategic planning effort, and all of them came out as a result of stopping and realizing that we had to incorporate at the same time the kind of financial and budgetary planning that would make it possible for us to carry out this ambitious program. So let me just, I shouldn't have just stood up here and ranted and raved like I did. I should have given you more of an opportunity to engage me. So let me stop, catch my breath, and give you a chance to ask me any questions, or I can amplify anything that was not clear. Yes, sir.
You just talked about the way that you were able to recruit faculty and some innovative methods that you were able to get colored faculty and more women faculty to come on board.
One of the things that we did, we're talking about what I just mentioned about getting the chair. One of the things we did was something that I think any institution could do. We went to the institutions I just mentioned, Harvard, Yale, Wisconsin, Michigan, Berkeley, Stanford, and said, give us the names of some of your young PhD students who are a dissertation away from completing their work. And we invited many of those students to come out and spend a year at Occidental, finish their research and their writing, their dissertation writing on our campus, teach a course perhaps, or join with a seasoned faculty member in teaching a course. This gave us an opportunity to see them, gave them an opportunity to see us, and where there ultimately turned out to be a match when they finished their PhDs, we were able to hire them. And we brought on about 10% of that number that I mentioned that we added through that mechanism. I'm convinced that, and I'm sure Tatiana will agree with this, one of the discussions we get in all the time with faculty when you talk about increasing the diversity of faculty is that people will say, well, you can't find them. The pipeline is too small. And those of us who realize that you can find them, that you have to have a will to find them. Yes, there may not be hundreds of thousands out there, but there certainly are a sufficient number that you could do something about improving the diversity of your faculties. It requires a willingness to want to do it and to develop innovative programs. And that's one of the ways in which we went about it. The other thing is that when people ask me, how were you successful when you brought people out to interview? And I said, it's very simple. They knew we were serious. And many times, it's just like I said when I told the personal story of being a candidate for an institution where going in I had a fear that they were not serious, that they were going through the motions, to be able to say that they were interviewing a minority candidate. You can tell when they're not serious. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. That's how we were successful. Yes, sir.
You spoke a little bit about the aggressive effort to create diversity in the college. What benchmark or threshold was used to say, diversity has been achieved? We've either matched the demographics of the city of Los Angeles or the state. How did you say this is the point where we have a diverse campus now, whether it's racially or economically?
We weren't really trying to match anything. We were, and the measure that U.S. News and World Report used, they just used numbers, but we weren't concerned about numbers. We certainly weren't concerned about quotas or trying to necessarily match the distribution of populations within the city. We felt that simply creating an environment in which people felt welcomed, people felt that full opportunity existed, and that we carried that out in practice, that the problem would solve itself, and that a more natural diversity would occur when people felt that this is a place where we would like to be, where we'd like to contribute, where we would like to participate. So I cannot even really tell you what the numbers were, and all I know is that the sense of being in an environment where equity prevailed became palpable. And that was the important thing. I've been back to the campus a couple times, and as you might imagine, these kinds of things wax and wane. They go up and down. But I was there just about 6 weeks ago, and that sense still exists. The same mission that we put in place in 1990 is the mission that the college is still abiding by, and that mission is based upon creating a pluralistic, interdependent environment. And so I feel good about the fact that at least we laid the groundwork for that to continue. But there really wasn't any explicit intent to have any specific set of numbers or measures, but more in changing the climate of the institution from one in which any one group felt some hegemonic role in the campus to one in which no longer were these kinds of barriers or these kinds of restrictions on participation existed. Yes, sir.
I really appreciate you being here tonight. You've spoken to a lot of issues that are central to the research that I do and future research that I'd like to think about doing. And I think that one of the greater problems that we face in higher education right now is a lack of understanding among the public and our communities about the role of colleges and universities in our society and in our communities. And I think that that is in part due to a breakdown in the relationships between communities and institutions, and a lack of discourse and dialogue about our role in society and broader purposes of our institutions. It sounds like you were very deliberate at Occidental and Maryland about how you approached relationships with communities, and I wonder if you were to offer advice to your presidential colleagues and peers at other institutions, what would be the greater takeaways regarding the implications of not doing that, not having those relationships, and building a discussion and a dialogue about the role of an institution in a community?
That's a very, very interesting question. Before trying to address that directly, let me make a comment. I'm not sure I would want to be a president today.
I hear that a lot, by the way, from people who have had that role.
Presidents today, I was thinking about this earlier, hoping you had asked that question. Presidents today seem to be absorbed in two things. One is fundraising, and the other is keeping their football team out of the NCAA restrictions. I used to say that don't be a college president unless you like football, because you're going to spend a lot of time on it, When I was both at Maryland and at Occidental, I had to do fundraising, and I had to deal with athletics. In fact, I spent a lot of time at Maryland on athletics. But my job was not 95% raising money. I had a chance to deal. I had a chance to think about curriculum. I had a chance to think about students. One of my great pleasures at Occidental was that I had a patio outside my office, and I had 2 benches installed on that patio. And almost every day about 11:30, I would take my mail and my phone and my cigar, and I would go out and I'd sit on one of those benches. And the bench and the patio was on the pathway where the students, when they left class, would go to their residence hall. And invariably, students would see me sitting there and come over and sit down on one of the benches, and we'd talk. And for me, that was the greatest joy of being at that institution. And I see presidents today not having time to talk to students, not having a chance to deal with student or faculty issues because they're too busy cultivating would-be donors. And I think we've lost something. University presidents used to be the people who would help set the directions for our culture. They were the people who would speak out against injustice and segregation and those things that were endemic to our society. Today they do not use, as someone said, the bully pulpit that they have to do that because they're too busy out there raising money. And I would not want to do that. I would not want to be that kind of president. I was going to say about Maryland. The University of Maryland situation for me was a very interesting one because when I graduated from high school, I could not have attended the University of Maryland as a student because it was a segregated institution. And so it was interesting that some years later I ended up being its president. And in my inaugural address at Maryland, I said I want University of Maryland to be a multicultural, multiracial, multi-generational community, an institution that is the first choice for people in the state of Maryland and for the surrounding areas. And I have to say that one of the greatest satisfactions I had, even though it was an institution that had been fully segregated, where its president at the time when I graduated from high school was a strict segregationist and who had upheld policies that prevented certainly prevented African Americans, had restrictions on Jewish students, and others. Even though there were some people who expressed unhappiness about my appointment, I had nothing but the greatest support for the changes that took place at the university during that time. So these environments can change, and I was blessed, and it's not because of anything that I did that was special, but I had a group of people around me who believed that it was the right direction to take. We worked closely with the community surrounding the University of Maryland and College Park community, solving some of the school town gown problems that existed. Dealing with raucous fraternities and things of that sort. But it does take just careful attention and listening and being willing to recognize that you can't afford to play the role of the 800-pound gorilla in a community where people have entrenched interests. So you're absolutely right. I think one of the major problems facing higher education today is that it has alienated itself from the communities, and until such time as we change that, and that's why I think that the presidential leadership of these institutions is going to have to change if in fact we're going to be able to solve some of those problems. Thank you. Any of the women have a question for me? I've got all these males asking questions.
I guess I'll ask a question.
You have a question?
Oh yeah. Are there any challenges that you faced at University of Maryland that were really distinct from those that you faced at Occidental? Because Maryland's a public institution, Occidental's a private one.
Well, the biggest problem I had in Maryland probably predated most of you was the problem with a basketball player who died from cocaine injection. Leonard Bias. Does anybody recognize the name Leonard Bias? Leonard Bias was an All-American basketball player, perhaps the best basketball player I've ever seen in my life. In 1986, he was the #1 draft choice of the Boston Celtics. He and his father went to New York, where he was at the NBA draft. He was named by the Celtics as their #1 choice. He on the same day he got a multi-million-dollar shoe contract from Reebok. Came back to Maryland. Decided to go celebrate with his teammates, and someone gave him a lethal dose of cocaine, and he died of a heart attack from cocaine overdose. It was a tragic loss of life, but also it had a significant impact upon the university. Not only because Leonard Bias was the nation's #1 basketball player, but what happened was people said, well, Maryland is nothing but a haven for drugs, and everybody is on drugs, and ultimately ended up I had to fire the basketball coach, remove the athletic director, put all sorts of things in place. I received death threats. And so, yeah, there are some things that happen at big universities that are not fun to recall. From June 19th, when it happened, until October, I don't think I did anything other than deal with that issue. And that's why I said a few minutes ago that I spent a lot of time on athletics when I was at Maryland. But school came through it and is better for it now.
I have a question. So first of all, thank you so much. It is such a privilege to have you sharing with us your experiences as a leader, so many different leadership positions that you have occupied. So it is a privilege, and for the PhDs and EDD students, very few times they have the opportunity to kind of reflect and interact with someone like you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And following up, I wanted to know if you can talk a little bit about what do you think are the qualities that define a leader in higher education, and we know how in the 20th century maybe these qualities were different, because now in the 21st century we're seeing the role of the president is kind of changing, and you alluded to that, and we have now much more of a division of labor with the provost taking some of the responsibilities. So if you can talk to us a little bit about those issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly true that because the role of the president has changed, becoming much more of the leading fundraiser for the institution, that many of the responsibilities for managing the affairs of the institution have been relegated to provost, or a person with a title. I was provost at Washington State University for a period of time, and it's a very difficult job, the provost, because you have all the responsibility for leading the academic program, and a very important role. But I still feel that to a large extent, removing the president from that role is not, in the long run, the best interest of the institution. There are a lot of the most important quality I can think of for a leader is a sense of humor. I always say that when everything else fails, being able to laugh, and oftentimes being able to laugh at yourself, is perhaps the most important thing. Certainly courage, being able to defend your position, but at the same time being able to recognize that you might be wrong, and being willing to listen to others is an exceedingly important quality, and far too few people are willing to do that. They think they're right, and they're adamant about holding on to their position. But I think that an academic leader today has to be a person who recognizes what we were just talking about here, and that is that you're dealing with a very broad constituency. You're dealing not only with the members of your campus community, but you have to recognize that your role reaches out to people who are connected with the institution in many, many different ways. Not just the campus community, but the alumni, the people who are affected by your decisions, and the people who, in the long run, can be your supporters because you have included them, you've empowered them to assist you in making the decisions about how the campus operates. We had over 300 people involved in our strategic planning effort. Not just the people on the campus, but community leaders, people who ran the businesses in Eagle Rock, persons who could help us think larger about what it meant for us to be a small liberal arts college in a community and in the larger city of Los Angeles. And having that many people feel some sense of ownership in the outcome made a huge difference in the acceptance. So I think I think leadership now has to be seen in a much broader context than perhaps we've seen it in the past, and it has to be inclusive, and it has to recognize that there are merits in having the input, and the ideas, and the thoughts of a much larger number of persons than heretofore have been the pattern.
So before listening to you, I used to quote the work by Professor Zemsky at UPenn, that he says that you always have to be mission-centered
Mm-hmm.
and market-savvy. But after listening to you, I think it's like this combination of excellence and equity that really makes a difference. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that, and how can we accomplish that?
Well, I believe very strongly in the ideas of excellence and equity for reasons that I mentioned earlier. That we have one of the problems in higher education now is that, and I mentioned U.S. News and World Report, and I made a comment that I was proud that we were identified as diverse. On the other hand, I do not get infatuated by beauty contests, which is what the U.S. News and World Report really is in most cases, because all they measure are inputs. What are the things that they use to decide whether or not you are highly ranked? They measure the number of volumes in your library. They measure your faculty salaries. They measure how many alumni are giving money to your institution. They measure the SAT scores of your incoming students. They measure how many people you reject. And if you look good in all those criteria, you may be number one or number two. And I always say that we shouldn't say that my institution is better than your institution because someone who can get in your institution can't get in mine. That's a negative way to think about quality. I would rather have an institution that is committed to providing its students with not only the fullest possible academic experience, but also with the fullest possible high-quality social experience, being able to navigate the turbulent waters of the future in a way that can make it possible for them to be successful. And in order to do that, I have to recognize that the world is ever-changing, that we have to understand that we no longer are isolated, that we are part of a large global environment that requires us to understand different languages, different cultures, different ways of thinking, different religions, different means of achieving our goals, and involving people with different ideas, different background, different experiences. That, to me, is how we create an environment where excellence can prevail. And what that means is that all of those different groups of people have to feel that they are in an environment where equitable opportunity exists and equitable participation exists. That's where the excellence and equity comes in. And if you don't have that, your success is going to be short-lived, and is not going to be the kind that would make it possible for the future to be better than the present. So I am a strong devotee of recognizing that there is no quality without equality, there is no excellence without equity, that those things have to go hand in hand if in fact we're going to have an excellent educational environment. And that's been my creed for as long as I've had an opportunity to open my mouth about this topic.
Thank you so much. So one last question. Yeah, you're lucky.
Good.
In this topic, we've been discussing how our higher educations are being hit in one way or another by the financial crisis, which is why I imagine that the president's role has picked up a large part of the fundraising role. So, in your experience, taking the current economy into mind, which institutional leaders would best be able to take back the fundraising roles if the president were to focus on the students again?
Which institutional leaders would be able to?
Who could the president give those roles back?
Well, in my experience, the hierarchy, pardon me, the president has a cabinet, usually with a provost, but usually with a person who has a title of vice president for institutional advancement or vice president for development and so forth. That person's primary responsibility, at least in my way of thinking, and maybe I'm outdated now given the changes that occurred, that person has a responsibility for being the lead in developing the donor contacts, and that the president is brought in to close the deal, but is not 100% of his or her time involved in developing the contacts. And I think what's happening is that the environment for fundraising has changed significantly over the past, and that presidents are finding it necessary, perhaps, to play a more active role. And I just sort of reject that as being in the best interest of the higher educational institution. I would rather have high quality institutional advancement officers, development officers, who are able to do at least 90% of the work and getting the potential for fundraising, and then having the president come in where necessary to close the deal. This university is on target for a $6 billion capital campaign. That is a huge number when you stop and think about how much money you have to raise every day to accomplish $6 billion. And the size of the fundraising staff necessary to do this, it just gives you some idea that we have become so dependent upon these large financial sums in order to operate these institutions, that at some point in time we've got to rethink the way in which we carry out education. And I am of the opinion that that time is here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.